Please give a warm MREA welcome to Amanda Little.
Thank you so much. I have to say, this is absolutely the coolest event I've ever spoken at. I was told in my brief for my speaking event that the attire was business formal. So I came with a black suit and pumps and a crisp white shirt, and I said, Doug, are you sure you want me wearing a suit to this thing? He said, no. And I got in late last night and sped at very high speeds to get to the Renewable, and it was just totally yay. It was so well worth my risking multiple speeding tickets to get to the musical. And I have to say, never have I before followed a singing rutabaga at a speaking event, and I consider it a profound honor. And I hail from Nashville, Tennessee, and I have already spoken with the director of the Renewable about bringing that to Nashville, Music City, USA, as soon as possible. So thank you so much to Doug and to the Midwest Renewable Energy folks. This is just such an honor. I'm going to try and bring this up a little bit. Perfect, okay, yeah. I spoke with Bill McKibben last night. I missed his presentation, but he's been a mentor of mine for a long time, and he said, Amanda, listen, I really hope that you have some good news to share with these folks, because I think yesterday I might have cast a pall over the conference, over this irrepressibly joyful event. He said, I think I might have delivered a lot of bad news, so see if you can lighten it up a bit, and I hope that I will do that. I said, Doug, how much bad news do you want and how much good news do you want? He said, maybe about 20% bad news, 80% good news. So I'm going to work on that, maybe even tip it toward good news. The oil spill is an obvious example of why we really need optimism right now. And I would argue even there that this is propelling a nationwide awakening. There's a silver lining emerging from this horrific disaster, and right here in front of me, I can see the message of change and renewal and regeneration and sustainability that is what needs to spread around the country. So I feel like I'm in good company when talking about the fact that we can turn around very, very dire catastrophic circumstances with good news. I think we're coming to terms with the challenges we face in our energy landscape and also the opportunities. But the single most shocking thing to me about this event is that for the first time, this invisible crisis of energy has become very, very visible in these almost gory terms. This thick brown scum coating these thousands of miles of waters and coastline. And for the first time, Americans are having to kind of recognize that there are these hidden risks and consequences of our energy use. Maybe for the first time since the Arab oil embargo, are we seeing it and feeling it in such visceral terms. But still, most of us, and particularly my own neighbors and friends, in my neck of the woods in Nashville, and all throughout the United States, have not still come to terms with the size of our appetite for energy. And it shocks me that in a single day, we as a nation consume about 800 million gallons of oil per day. That's about 20 times the total volume of crude that has spilled into the Gulf so far. So all things considered, it's a negligible amount of oil in the context of our total energy use in the U.S. We on average per day, we consume about 25 gallons of oil per person. And by comparison, the people of Europe per capita use about 17 barrels of oil, and I'm sorry, this is per year, and the people of Japan use about 14. So per capita in the US, we're using about 30 to 40% more oil per day than all of our industrial competitors, or our two major industrial competitors, which is a shocking reality when we think about the challenges we face ahead. And I'd like to just give another kind of amazing fact. When we look at our entire energy picture, oil, coal, natural gas, nuclear, hydro, etc., the U.S. uses just over 9,000 BTUs per U.S. dollar of GDP, and Japan, by comparison, uses about 4,500 BTUs per US dollar of GDP. So that means that we're about half as efficient in our energy use as Japan. And again, that's just a shocking reality when we look at our energy challenges ahead. I've described it as an obesity epidemic. I think in a certain way, the way we relate to energy is somewhat like the way we relate to fast food. But in this case, it's a little bit more insidious because we don't see it visibly in pounds of flesh, or we don't see it. We don't see the visible consequences of this appetite. It disperses invisibly into the atmosphere after we burn it. It's hidden away in pipelines beneath the oceans and in transmission wires that are tucked away, well above our highways. So again, the challenge is making this real and visible to people. I think in order to really identify this, we have to do away with the blame. And when we hear these kinds of statistics, we often start talking immediately about who's to blame. Is it the petroleum industry? Is it our politicians? I would like to do away for the next 30 minutes with the question of blame, and not pass judgment, but rather recognize that in order to address our abuse of fossil fuels, we have to understand our use of them. And how did we get into this mess? How did we, without looking at who's at fault, let's just try and understand how we got here. And I think that that's what I try to do in my book, and I think history gives us hope. When we begin to kind of track our progress to the current moment and understand what led to this, we can get a pretty shocking and a pretty hopeful and surprisingly so understanding of our appetite for energy. My book, Power Trip, does this. It looks at, I took a personal tour of America's energy crisis. I kind of romp through into the core of our energy crisis, the dark, the heart of darkness, as it were. And I started out on an oil rig 200 miles off the coast of Louisiana, and it was a sibling of the Horizon rig, in fact, owned by the same company. Spent a day out there. I'll tell you a little bit about that. And I went from there into the catacombs of the Pentagon, to NASCAR Superspeedway. I witnessed a plastic surgery. I traveled into the guts of the New York City electricity grid. Traveled down my local produce aisle, and all these were efforts to kind of understand these extreme frontiers of our energy use, how energy has become so central in our lives. And what I discovered in the course of this experience was that indeed, oil and coal, cheap oil and coal, built the American superpower. It made us great. It made us extremely powerful, and gave us the freedoms we enjoy today. But of course, our greatest strengths have become our greatest vulnerabilities. I met pioneers who, like many of you out there, who are innovating solar, wind, electric cars, advanced plastics, smart grid, green buildings, and so on. After my travels into the heart of darkness, I tried to travel into these emerging frontiers of renewal and regeneration, and I'll give you a sense of that too. But what I discovered at the end of this all was that it was ingenuity that got us into this mess, and it's ingenuity that's going to get us out of it. My journey began with a tour of my office. I'm going to give you a quick little snapshot of that kind of intimate personal tour I took around my own life. As I think you heard, I had spent about 10 years writing a lot of politically inflected columns about what the government was doing wrong, why we weren't promoting innovation and accelerating the development of clean energy industries. And then one morning I kind of decided to take a more personal look, put politics aside and take a kind of up close and personal look at the way that energy figures into my own life. And here's what I found. Since nearly all plastics, polymers, inks, paints, fertilizers, and pesticides are made from petrochemicals, and all products are delivered to market by trucks, trains, ships, and airplanes, there was virtually nothing in my office, my body included, that wasn't there because of fossil fuels. There I sat at a desk made of formica, a plastic, wearing a sweatshirt made of fleece, a polymer, over yoga pants made of lycra, ditto, sipping coffee shipped from Zimbabwe, eating an apple trucked from Washington, surrounded by walls covered with oil-derived paints, jotting notes in petroleum-derived ink, typing words on a petrochemical keyboard into a computer powered by coal plants. Even the supposedly guilt-free whole grain cereal I'd had for breakfast and the veggie burger I ate for lunch came from crops treated with oil-derived fertilizers. My purse yielded another trove of specimens, capsules of extra-strength Tylenol made from acetaminophen, a substance like many commercial pain relievers that's refined from petroleum, glossy magazines and a packet of photographs printed with petrochemicals, mascara, lip balm, eyeliner, and perfume that, like most cosmetics, have key components derived from oil. I'd understood this before, that energy landscape encompasses not just our endless acres of oil fields, coal mines, gas stations, and highways, and the vast network of copper wires that feeds electricity to our homes and offices. It's also the cornfields in America's heartland, the battlefields of Iraq, the medical labs that produce penicillin, Novocaine, chemotherapy drugs, and many other treatments and cures. It's the cosmetic shelves and glossy magazine racks in our drugstores, and the constantly humming behind-the-scenes network of ships, planes, trains, and trucks that transport products to our store shelves. It's even our own bodies, which we routinely drape in synthetic fabrics and feed with crops fertilized by fossil fuels. What I hadn't managed to grasp was the intimate and invisible omnipresence of these fuels in my own life. Once I connected the dots between so many disparate elements of my life, my car, my clothes, my email, my makeup, my burger, even my health, I saw an energy landscape far more vast and complex than I'd imagined. And what happened there was that it was like this bad word, I had thought of oil and coal as this nasty word, and I had been, criticizing industries and government officials for so long for not doing more to move us away from these. But I began to see how intimately my own life was connected to these fuels, and it was, they were so responsible for things that are part of my comforts, my health, the details, the rich personal details of my life. What I realized at the end of my journey was that the challenge isn't technology, it's our mindsets. We have to understand, and relate to the role of energy in our lives in a different way. It's abundantly clear around us now that we have the technology in our midst to begin, radical shift away from fossil fuels. But what's keeping us from that? What's keeping us is, our own emotional relationship to this and the way we discuss it with others. We have to make Americans care, and how do we do that? This is something that came up in an earlier comment, and I think back when I ask myself that all the time to an interview I had with President Obama when he said, "Look, politics is about storytelling. The way you change hearts and minds is you tell stories and you engage people in those stories." And I think that to me and to many of us here, energy is the greatest story of our time. It's the story of a kind of Greek mythology where fossil fuels built us up, they made us great, and then our greatest strength became our greatest vulnerability. But even though it's such an exciting story, it's very hard to engage Americans in this. And here we have a lot of people who are deeply connected to the issue, but for the most part, I've discovered in my own journeys around the U.S. talking to folks that it's very, very hard to communicate to people what this energy story is. And I discovered this early on in my book tour when I was in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I was at a book fair with 18,000 people, and I was at booth number 1. Booth number 2 rather. Booth number 1 was the book Chicken Soup for the Soul, and booth number 3 was The Cake Doctor, which is a book that can solve all your baking crises if you are indeed a cake maker. And so people started trickling in, and they looked at Chicken Soup for the Soul, oh hooray, a new version of that, and we picked up a copy, and then they looked at Power Trip, and they see this kind of shocking iconography of windmills and oil pumps and gas pumps, and they had a visual sort of gag reflex, like they recoiled, and a couple of people started kind of shooing at me and going ooh, and I thought, and then right then they looked to the next booth, and there indeed was The Cake Doctor, and total relief, went flying over to the Cake Doctor table. And I swear for the first 4 hours of this event, I literally could not sell a single book. And I'm flagging people down, please, there's 18,000 people, how could I not sell a single book? Please come over and talk to me. And I realized after getting over my humiliation, 4 hours into it, I realized that I really had to take a proactive stand. So I started flagging people down, please come talk to me. How can you resist? And I said, listen, this is not, one of those preachy, technical energy books. It's really, have you heard of this book, Eat, Pray, Love? And they would all go, oh, of course I've heard of it. It's this, book of this woman's journey to find enlightenment. And I said, well, this is exactly what my book is. It's kind of like Eat, Pray, Love meets Guns, Germs, and Steel. And they all kind of said, okay. And I said, well, listen, don't worry. Cincinnati, by the way, is a very heavily conservative city politically. And I said, don't worry, this is, really not a political manifesto of any kind. I said, you know that South Park episode where they announced that Prius drivers are emitting toxic levels of smog? I said, listen, I'm totally smug-free. This is a smug-free zone. And so by the end of this day, this grueling day, I ended up selling, I think it was like 67 copies of Power Trip, and I consider it probably will, on my dying day, I'll think that was the greatest success of my career. But truly, this was an effort in sort of stripping, shedding away layers of smug for me. And what I tried to do was take myself out of the comfort zone of finger wagging and saying what was wrong, and try to immerse myself in these industries that I'd been criticizing for a decade. So I start out, as I mentioned, on the Cajun Express, which was this rig, this oil rig out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. And I went there with Paul Siegley, who's the head of offshore drilling for Chevron. And this is indeed where, the vast majority of drilling is now happening. It's the final frontier of oil drilling. So I was going to look at the technologies that they were using to go, to penetrate these unimaginable depths. And learn about them, and we get to the oil rig, and step off the helicopter onto this sort of metal grating, and the whole thing is shaking, it's trembling like this apocalyptic vibration. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's going to blow, And this was long before the explosion, but Paul Siegley said, oh no, that's not. Don't be worried about that. That's just the thrusters, which are these gigantic gigantic engines on the corners of the rig that are pushing and pulling against the ocean currents and keeping it on station literally within 6 inches of the point of entry below, which was about 7,000 feet below the raft. And they were then inserting the drill 30,000 feet below sea level, so about 5 miles deep. And the rig was consuming about 40,000 gallons of diesel fuel a day just to keep those thrusters moving, pushing and pulling to keep the rig on station. And it was like that throughout the whole day. It was just one shocking fact after another. Oh my gosh, are you really going to these extremes to get oil? You know, inserting this syringe into the innermost veins of the earth to get this stuff? And indeed, they were. And by the end of the trip, they said, well, listen, if you really are going to be an energy warrior, you're going to have to travel to the crown of the rig, which is the top 250 feet above the hydraulic drill that was thrusting into the earth. And, you know, to preserve my pride, I had to go ahead and do that. And here I was probably in the most absurd reporting environment I'd ever been in, and taking on the most absurd reporting challenge I ever have. And I said, well, sure, this is the sort of foreman of the ship, whose name was the Hammer. And the Hammer said, you gonna go with me, you know, to the crown? And I said, okay. He got me. I said, well, how do we get there? And he pointed to basically this vertical coffin, which was like a plastic box the size of a coffin, you know, standing upright and on a forklift that just went up the side of the drill, the scaffolding surrounding the drill. And I said, so I get in that thing, and then, you know, and he said, well, no, we'll both get in there. And I thought, wow, okay. Well, there's the one thing that was slightly awkward beside the obvious, was that the Hammer was about, you know, 5'6" or so, and I'm a tall lady, so that put us in this slightly awkward, you know, intimate situation where his head was about right here. So I thought, wow, well, do I face the Hammer? Or do I turn away? So I kind of thought, I think it's probably a better idea to have my back to the Hammer, you know, just so I don't want to, you know, make anything more awkward than it needs to be. And so it's fine. So I start closing the accordion doors, like sort of in a Motel 6. You have the sort of accordion doors on the closets. So they kind of pull closed, it's plastic, and there's just a little latch like this that kind of comes over and keeps the doors together. But they don't fully meet. There's like a 2-inch gap between the two doors. So I'm sitting there with the Hammer behind me, my nose practically sticking out of this 2-inch gap, and the thing starts shuddering, going up like literally, like lurching, you know, very, very slowly up this 250-foot vertical climb. And suffice it to say that I became very close to multiple panic attacks. And once I got over that, at the top of the rig, I stood there with the Hammer and Paul Siegley, who eventually had joined us, and I said, and I was looking out at this vast seascape and these, you know, this churning ocean waters. I said, if you're going to put, you know, billions and billions of dollars a year into this highly risky endeavor, wouldn't it be smarter to put it into something, you know, that has a future, like wind or solar, maybe geothermal? I mean, we could, you know, batteries. I mean, let's talk. And he said, Amanda, he said, how did you get here? What's that thing you're wearing? You know, that's fleece. How did you, you know, what's the ink in your pen made from? And he took me back through that own personal little journey I'd taken in my own office, and reminded me that oil is, the demand for oil and its role in our lives is so incredibly intimate and so enormous in scale that, you know, he's like, we're we're pretty set for, for the foreseeable future. There are going to be people needing our product, and as long as they need our product, as you need our product, we will be providing it. We'll find a way to get it. And we have overcome, the impossible before in terms of technological challenges, and we will continue to do that. And he said, mark my words, in 10, 20 years, he swept his hand across this seascape. He said, we will see rigs in this area as far as the eye can see. And it was so chilling. It was so, nauseating, literally, on a certain level to hear him say that. But then on the other, I began to see that as a, and have in the following years as a shockingly plausible scenario. I think, and I'd love to talk about this after if folks want to get into it, but I think that efficiency and the role that we have as consumers is number one on our priority list right now. It has to be, and it's completely absent from the conversation, which is, as long as we demand it, they're going to provide it, and it has to start with us. And it's not, they're not going to voluntarily stop going to those extraordinary depths until we say we don't want it. The thing that was more surprising, however, was that I went there expecting to be totally appalled, and I was dazzled by the ingenuity that they were applying to go to these extraordinary depths. And I thought, you know what? If we can do this, if we can guide drills 30,000 feet to the earth, we can certainly figure out how to make wind and solar cheap. And there's a bit of an irony there because clearly we can't figure out how to plug a leak. So there are very clear limits to our technological ingenuity. But I believe that we will overcome that, and I think we will overcome all of our technology challenges. The problem, again, is mindset and connecting people to this issue. The story of Power Trip was an effort to understand this love affair. I think over and over and over I began to see going to NASCAR super speedways and visiting the Pentagon and seeing the role of energy and oil in war, in plastics, in medicines, in our joyriding culture. All of this is indicative of a love affair that we've had with these old, antiquated fossil fuel technologies. But what's happening here in this room and what's happening throughout the U.S. is another kind of passion, is a passion for these new, innovative renewables that are coming online, and that has to be indicated, that has to become apparent to people through stories, human stories. And I'll tell you a little bit about those human stories as I wrap this up. First of all, the history of America tells us the story of this love affair, of this passion. And 4 quick stories to just give you a sense of that. FDR and Ibn Saud, the king of the founder of the current Saudi royal dynasty, met in 1945 on the USS Quincy. It was the first meeting between a leader of the West and a leader of the East. And it was the moment that, the kind of founding moment, the milestone that established this relationship between the United States and the Middle East, and this privileged access that we've had to their oil in exchange for military presence in that region. But what was amazing about it is that the same crisis that we're now struggling with today started with good intentions and great friendships. And the story is remarkable to read about, because the Saudi king had never before left his homeland, and we went to pick him up in a naval battleship and offered him all all the great, royal treatment, quite literally in our terms, and he rejected them all. He said, we gave him the great Commodore's cabin of the ship. He said, no, I can't possibly sleep inside a room. So he pitched a tent, laid down these Persian rugs, pitched a tent on the deck of the ship, brought in a flock of 40 sheep, a royal astrologer. He had a retinue of 40 or more handlers, and he came, sailing with this kind of splendor toward FDR, who was waiting for him on another ship where they were going to meet. And FDR was there, chain-smoking cigarettes, and saw him approaching. Sees this king, who's never before left his homeland, flying with his robes, flying, and Persian tents out, sheep walking around the ship, and astrologers who were leading prayer all day long, and knowing where to bow toward based on the stars and the moon. And there's FDR seeing this guy come floating by, and he says, "My God, this is fascinating, absolutely fascinating." And he quickly stabs out his cigarette because Wahhabi traditions prohibit tobacco. And for the next basically 5 hours, the two leaders met and became fast friends. And they described themselves as twins at the end of this visit. They both had lame legs, and or I'm sorry, in the case of FDR, clearly he had polio and was consigned to a wheelchair. But the Saudi Ibn Saud had a lame leg, and they talked about their ailments, and which is something that FDR famously never did. And at the end of the meeting, he gave an extra wheelchair, a spare wheelchair, to Ibn Saud, and he later counted this as his single, most important possession. FDR died actually 6 months after this meeting, and Ibn Saud said, that was the greatest gift he'd ever received, and it was in this eccentric, scene of an exchange of gifts, of astrologers, of sheep roaming around, that these challenges we now face, this relationship with this very, very volatile and troubled region of the world, it was in these very friendly, eccentric circumstances that problem began. And I'll say again, in so many scenarios we see as we track the origins of our appetite for oil, of our obsession with fossil fuels, and our relationship to keeping that oil flowing, it was out of kind of really, in many cases, good intentions and good innovation. In the case of Edison, the origins of our electric industry were equally eccentric and fascinating. He threw the switch to the first power plant in the U.S. Down in Wall Street at the bottom of Manhattan, and he was in the offices of J.P. Morgan. Never before had the United States ever seen, multiple light bulbs light up at one time, and he had built up a huge excitement and attention around this issue in the media, and so there was a lot of pressure on him and the investors to make it happen. And so he threw the switch, and they closed the circuit breaker, and then the next thing you know, the 1,200 lights pop on all throughout Wall Street, and the whole city went just bananas. It was like, compared to the phosphorescent effulgence of the Star of Altair, it was like everybody had been just seeing magic happen. And thereafter, this flung open the doors to this era of electricity that we now enjoy today, and the centralized electricity that we're now struggling to shift away from. But again, in those early stages, that was ingenuity. It it work. It was our great, American hero Edison who was demonstrating this, and it became kind of synonymous with the American dream. As you electrify the nation, you liberate Americans. You open the door to to all these great opportunities in factories and mass production and so on. And so again, this thing that we're struggling to remove ourselves from was at the root of the American dream and American progress. Henry Ford, too, he got the Model T on the road and using these electrified factories, got his car on the road in 1908, and it was selling then at the equivalent of $23,000 per car in today's dollars. 20 years later, it was selling, he had put 20 million cars on the road, and they were selling for roughly $3,400 a pop in the mid-20s. So again, that was a shocking sign of progress in the United States, that we were able to, that Ford was able to, ramp up production and make this available to all. Having a car was part of being an American at the time. And William Levitt, too, the founder of Suburbia, was putting a home up every 15 minutes. He had an assembly system for homes that was literally producing homes every 15 minutes. And again, this was all celebrated as this is part of our love, or part of being an American is using these these innovations, these cars, these suburban homes, to make your life more comfortable, safer, freer. And now the challenge we face is shifting to a new mindset, replacing the passion that we developed, the identity as Americans we developed around using those antiquated fossil fuels with a new kind of passion, with a new kind of lifestyle, with the new freedoms that are afforded to us from sustainable energy, from local sustainable farming, and from efficient homes, electric cars, public transit, and so on. It's the challenge we're dealing with now is finding a way to communicate a passion that is equal to and greater than a passion for renewable energy, and a new kind of energy that's equal to and greater than the passion for these old, antiquated fossil fuels of the yore. But only until we kind of see that. For me, it was so powerful to understand that it was, in fact, we have this great nostalgia for the life that was built up around fossil fuels. And that there really was, even talking to my grandparents and parents about these milestones in U.S. history taught me that that we as a nation, yes, we're struggling. We've got major problems that we're struggling with, but above all, it's an emotional challenge to move away from from these nostalgic connections to fossil fuels. I think that it's clear it's happening now, and again, this event is convincing me, that this is a beautiful example of it. That these stories of passion for a new way of living are emerging and available to everyone, or becoming more and more available to all of us. And I think that T. Boone Pickens was another example of the story. I'd like to give you a couple more stories as I close, but the T. Boone Pickens, as you know, was the kind of legendary oilman who built an empire around as a kind of wildcatter, and he has since become an evangelist of wind energy and the emerging renewables, and also natural gas, which is, I think, a major hitch in his plan. But regardless, he's an amazing example of someone whose life was built on this passion for fossil fuels, and he has since transitioned it to a passion for energy. And I felt when meeting him that if this guy can do it, then pretty much everyone can do it. Where Pickens goes, so goes America. But he took me out in his private jet to this area of East Texas where he wanted to build this wind farm with this massive, the biggest wind farm in the world, Pampa, Texas. And there he made the case to all these residents of East Texas whose land he would be leasing for his wind farms. He made the case to them that one windmill on your land would be is far greater than any oil well he ever drilled. And he said, look, say you have a windmill on your land that's doing $20,000 a year in electricity. He said it's just blades on a post. It's simple technology, but it's going to be blowing out there for a century, maybe more. It's easy maintenance. It's a really long-term technology. I mean, long-term investment. And he said, whereas the oil wells that had been drilled all over this region, by the way, would just produce for a couple decades and then they dry out. And so over time, you're going to get maybe $2 million of revenue for your family if you have one of these gigantic windmills. Whereas if you're drilling for oil on your land, you have only something that provides income for a couple decades, and then you got to move on and pack up and go elsewhere. And just to hear him describe that was so moving, and to see the people respond in ways, and then some hesitation came up in the crowd. Well, what about the sound? What about this visual blight? We don't want to look at these things. And then a guy in the crowd stood up and he said, "What do you mean? They ain't any prettier than the oil derricks that we're looking at all day long. What's the problem with a windmill?" And they all kind of went, "Well, you're right. We've been looking at oil derricks all our lives, and we get used to looking at these." And then another guy stood up and said, "Well, they're kind of noisy," and he said, "That's just the sound of money in your pocket." And it was this kind of this connection between technology and humans that was so resonant in that particular experience. And again, throughout my travels, meeting these pioneers who are finding ways to bring clean renewable technologies into communities and homes and businesses. The Googleplex, Google is doing amazing things in the development of the smart grid, the electric grid, and I met with some of the engineers there who are finding ways to use the similar technologies that enables the web to work, the internet to work, as part of the model for a worldwide energy web, essentially, that's able to have these dynamic conversations between energy users and energy producers, and it was again this amazing synergy between what's happening in the .com world and information and smart technology and energy technology. But by far the most profoundly moving story I encountered in my whole power trip was the story of Melba Leggett, who lives in the lower 9th Ward of Louisiana, New Orleans, and her home was crushed and swept away by Hurricane Katrina. And she is among about 100 families that are now being resettled on the plots of land where they grew up. It's a project called Make It Right, and they're building these. They've collected, I think, 21 architects who are competing to develop the most high-performing green home. It's also the most affordable. And so the families are getting the homes for about $150,000 each. But Melba Leggett was one of the first to move in, and she took me through her house, and she showed me the solar panels on her rooftop, and she came up there with a mop, and she said, these things, they're amazing. They're silent. That's a lot better than that coal plant. She pointed to this massive coal plant that she could see from her roof. She said, "Can you believe that? that, they're making energy, and they are just silent. They just sit there and do it without making a sound. And I said, well, you're right. I've been writing about this for 10 years, and I kind of tend to forget about that remarkable detail that these things are absolutely silent. And she brought her mop. She said, the only thing they need to do is you got to just mop them down once in a while, because, and I said, well, really? I didn't know that. She said, well, I do it every week. She said, it might be too much, but she said, every last drop of sun is money in my pocket. And she said, I'm not going to let one speck of dust get between me and those rebates. She said, I bet Mr. Big Energy didn't know he'd be paying Melba Leggett for her sunshine, but she said, but no dust is getting between me and that money. So she's up there mopping her solar panels down once a day, and then she showed me her geothermal system, and she said, you know what this means? She said, it basically just means, it taps the temperature of the earth. She said, it basically just means my air conditioning and heating doesn't have to work so hard. And I said, Melba, my gosh, I've been, interviewing PhDs about geothermal technology. I said, if only someone had made it that simple. It just means my house doesn't work so hard to have to clean, have to cool and heat it. That's absolutely right. And over she did this. She described these aspects of the insulation in her walls, the geothermal, the cisterns. They have a rain capture system, the solar, and so on. It was just, she had this intuitive ease and understanding of how it worked. This is a woman who is in her late 50s. She's a grandmother of 7. She's worked in the school cafeteria for 45 years, and she moved into this home, and within days she had this understanding of, she absorbed the benefits of this technology in such an intuitive way that I just thought, wow, this is working. This is really working. And at the end of my stay, she brought me into her living room, and she gave me a cup of tea, and we sat there, and the room was just flooded with afternoon light. And she said, I used to keep my television on 15 hours a day. She said, we almost never turned it off. She said, my old house was so dark, there was nothing else to look at. I just kept the TV on. Now, I can see everything that's going on in my neighborhood. And she, of course, had passive solar design, so she had floor-to-ceiling windows all around her. She had 6 huge windows, and she could see. She said, oh, there's Gertrude Gay over there. She said, oh, you wouldn't believe her kids just came in from karate and ballet lessons, and oh, Mr. Green, he has another lady visitor, and she running over there. She goes, that rascal. She said that he's one womanizer, I tell you. And she was running around, and her grandkids were out front skipping rope, and another neighbor was playing dominoes, and she said, oh, and the dirt diver, she showed me this bird nest that was being built, and the butterflies floating by, and she described, she just spent 30 minutes maybe telling me what she loves to watch outside her windows. And it was such a powerful moment for me, because I realized that I had spent a year trying to understand America's energy crisis and the technology challenges that we face. And I realized that what's not just changing, what's changing is not just our technology, it's our consciousness. It's a shifting of consciousness. And the technology in the case of Melba Leggett was changing the way she relates to not just her home, but her neighbors, her community. It was bringing the outside in. It was bringing the natural world into her home and bringing her awareness into the natural world. She had suffered for asthma for a long, long time, and the filtration system in her home was so much better than her old home that she could stop taking her asthma medication. And that just changed my whole relationship to this topic. Because as we all sit here and look around at the technology workshops, and we relate to all these amazing innovations in making our homes more efficient and producing energy from the wind and the sun, we're also learning about this evolution in the way we relate to our communities, to the natural world, to ourselves, and to each other. I would like to leave on that note, and I think that, again, you know, what we need now is a sense of optimism, is of course an understanding and a real faith that as we relate to these new innovations and adopt them in our lives and develop a passion for them, that then we start sharing that with others. And that we start shifting this passion that we once had for this old way of producing energy into a passion for new, that we have you know, the power to change. It all lies in that. It all lies in our ability to communicate our passion for these innovations with others. And for that matter, to do so via singing rutabagas and wind puppets and solar puppets, and I think that's what this event is all about. You know, is cultivating passions in people, and that starts radiating out into the world. So when Bill McKibben said, "I hope, you know, I didn't get too gloomy," and I said, "I don't know. I don't think you can really repress the optimism in that group, but you can sure try to give it back." So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.